start. Let me get Patty in here. So in, and can you hear me on your end?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Well, that you solved that in the earlier section. No sound. Better, what do they say? It's like kids. Better to be seen, not heard. My grandmother used to say on my dad's side. Anyway, so we're here to talk about some of the things about AZUSA Street, some of the miracles that happened, and then some of the things that we've seen God do. And we are like, God, do it again. But we know that God is more willing and able to do what he has said he will do than we are ready to receive it often. And I think this story about AZUSA Street fits right in with that. So I'm so blessed to have Patty Wilkinson and Rob. Well, Robert won't be here, but Robert and Patty have a wonderful ministry. And tell us about your ministry a little bit for a moment, Patty.
Well, Robert and I have, we believe that each person, when they receive the gift of Holy Spirit, can operate all 9 manifestations that are recorded in 1 Corinthians 12. So we have decided that each person needs to know they can operate them and be taught to do it, to just do it, because we believe that it's not in word only. It's not just the word, but in demonstration of the Spirit and power. So we need to demonstrate the Spirit. We need to have power in each person's life, and that they can operate those manifestations. It's God has given them the ability, so they need to know that they have that power within, and they need to begin to act. So we teach people how to operate manifestations of the Spirit.
Yeah, I like it. Thank you. I mean, and Robert has released how many books dealing with this now, or booklets, or whatever you want to call them?
7 books so far. He should have 8 done soon, and then he'll have 1 left to do, which is faith. So he's just finished Word of Knowledge a couple weeks ago, and soon Word of Wisdom, because it kind of goes in with that, and then faith will be the last one.
Well, how exciting. Well, let's get into our context today of AZUSA Street, some of the miracles that happened there, and we're just going to touch the surface. And Patty's going to be telling us a lot of the miracles and things, and I'm going to share a little bit of the background. Williamseymour was a black man who was the son of a slave. And his father, well, he's the son of course, fought in the Union Army. Well, Williamseymour was blind in one eye, and you would think that there could be no less likely person for God to choose to have to lead a movement that goes into a mighty move of his word. Because, like, come on, if Williamseymour came up to a church today, I kind of doubt people would just check back in, in another week or something, whatever. So in Topeka, Kansas, there was a guy named Charles Parham that had a revival school, a teaching ministry school, and then he opened one in, I think it was Houston, Texas, but in Texas. And Williamseymour, William Parham opened the school in 1901. So somewhere between that and 1906, Williamseymour got connected in some ways and was down. When Charles would be teaching, he would sit outside the building because of color laws and people's attitudes, kind of like mask laws and things we have today in one sense, and in another not really. But anyway, so William would sit outside these meetings where Charles would be teaching and sharing the word and doing his schooling, training his students, but he would sit outside the door. It didn't matter hot or cold or whatever. He would be out there listening, taking in this teaching that Charles was sharing. And then it so happened about 1906 that Williamseymour got invited to Los Angeles to minister in a church, because people we want to hear what you're doing, what God is doing and all. And he had a real focus on baptism of the Spirit and speaking in tongues. Williamseymour did. So he goes to this church. He gets the train. He gets his ticket. He sells out completely to do this, taking all the risk that anyone. Okay, I'm going to go and see what happens. And very shortly thereafter, the church invited him to preach, put a lock on the door and a sign that they did not want him there anymore. So that's the end of that. So now what are you going to do? Well, there was a person there that said, I'll tell you what, why don't you come to my house and preach? And it was a house on Bonnie Bray Street. So William went to this house and was preaching and teaching this baptism of the Holy Spirit. Was kind of new, this thing about tongues and speaking in tongues and operating the Spirit. And what was happening, that it was so powerful that hundreds of people were coming. There was no room in the house. They would be outside on the steps and, wherever around the house. And within up to a fair distance from the house, people were falling down on the ground because, you figure it out. God was doing what he was doing, and I couldn't explain it. So people were getting touched. And so people rising in their horse and buggies would ride, come through, and the horses were like, we're not going near those bodies, and they would avoid them and everything. And the city of Los Angeles said that this is too much. He said the city came and said, we're either shutting this operation down or you've got to get another place. So Williamseymour is like, God, do you have another place for us? And almost across the street, a short distance, was AZUSA Street. And this was a building that had been in later years like a barn. It had been a storage thing, and it had actually been a church early on, but it was if you've seen pictures of it was pretty well in disrepair and all. Now, Williamseymour thought this would be a good place, went to God. He said, man, I have, can't remember, but it was like, I have $5 or something. It wasn't much. It was that or less. And there's no way I could get this place. So he goes, God, what would you have me do? So God tells him to get on the trolley and go down to Pasadena, and God's going to work out the details. So he's obedient. God doesn't give him a lot of information. Basically, get on this trolley and go, let me handle the rest. So he's on this trolley, Williamseymour is, down to Pasadena, and he's in an area where there's all these mansions and very expensive rich homes like maybe he hadn't really seen or familiar with. But he hears God say, get off here. So he pulls the string on the trolley, and it stops, and he gets off, and he starts walking. As he passes the second mansion, God says, go up to that house and knock on that door. So go up to that house. So Williamseymour goes up to that house, knocks on the door. Now I have to add here, they had the curfew for the black people, right? We understand that there was this curfew that you couldn't be out after dark, at dusk, then dark. And here it was 10:30, and William's going, God, I could be arrested here. And it isn't that he heard God say anything, but he was trusting God to take care of him. So he goes up to this house and knocks, and a woman answers the door, and says, may I help you? And he says, you've been praying for revival, haven't you? And she said, yes, and had been praying for revival for 2 years. So they invited him in, and he preached into the middle of the night at least, and they all were so touched by his message and the baptism of the Spirit and all that they gave him plenty. They took up an offering and gave him plenty of finances, more than he would need to get this AZUSA Street. And so he goes back and gets the AZUSA Street, and some of the people from that house, even in that prayer meeting, came up and helped clean up the place because it had been like a barn practically, and so it was quite a mess. So it needed cleaned up. And they started doing meetings there, and there are some of the most wild stories you might hear of God working. But I'm going to let Patty tell these things. I will interrupt or something, if you'll forgive me for that at some point, or throw in a little tidbit. But Patty, would you tell us some of the things that started happening in the area, people in the area and what was happening and all this? And so it's yours.
It was quite incredible because um, William Seymour would, I don't know if you want to tell me, would put his head like in a box first. Like he wouldn't show his face first. He would speak in tongues and talk to God until he felt like God said, okay, go. And then they would start singing. And many times they'd start singing in tongues. And then there would oftentimes a mist or a cloud would come in and kind of cover the ground, and then a fire would be on top of the building and sometimes even come down and meet the mist. And during these times there was just incredible miracles that would start breaking out, and many times the fire department was called, and it got to where somebody would call the fire department. They'd say, there's a fire on AZUSA Street. And they'd say, oh, quit calling us. We know it's not a fire. That's just God working. And they wouldn't even go anymore because they had gotten so many calls about fire being there. So it was kind of an incredible thing. But I wrote a few down. There was a group of deaf students that had heard about what was going on in AZUSA Street, and they wanted their teacher to bring them to AZUSA Street. And so they brought 35 deaf students in, and they had a hard time trying to get them in a circle. Like, okay, get them all in a circle. And they prayed, and that started with one receiving their hearing, and it went all the way around in a circle. So all 35 had completely been healed of being deaf. And the teacher said, I don't have a job. And when he got there, they said, you're not going to have a job after this. Like because they all got healed. Every one of them got healed. It was pretty amazing. Then there was a guy that had, he had the bottom of his leg cut off in a railroad accident. And they had put like a wooden peg leg thing on the bottom, and it had gotten gangrene in it. It was extremely painful. And he came in, and they said, well, take off the wooden part, which they did. And so they started praying for him. And pretty soon, like, he didn't want to lift up his pant legs. He was pretty kind of embarrassed. And but pretty soon a foot just shot straight out of his pant leg, and God just grew back the whole part that had been cut off. And one of the cool things was it wasn't like just William-Seymour, but it was these young children, many young children from 12 up would minister to people. They would be the ones praying for people for healing. One of the main ladies whose house he went to, her name was Mrs. Carney, I believe, but she prayed for a lot of people in wheelchairs, but she would never pray for him in a wheelchair until she lifted the footrests up, because she said they're going to be healed and they're going to walk. So she would literally lift up the footrest before she would actually minister to them. But the adults would bring their children, and the children would be many times the one that prayed for healing and saw the miracles. So there was a woman, I guess, with a staff that used to scoot around. Like, that's all she could do. She was dying of cancer. And they told her, she'd been to the doctor, and they said, you'll probably die tomorrow. So she went there, and she asked this one person specifically. She said, I want you to pray for me. And she said, okay. And so she ministered to her, and she was healed instantly, didn't need her staff. But when she was healed, she weighed 65 pounds. She was very, very frail, sick, and everything. The next day, she went to the doctor, and the doctor didn't know who she was. She weighed 105 pounds the next day. And the doctor said, there's no possible way that you could have gained this much weight since I saw you last time. She said, no, I gained this much weight overnight. And he said, you've been at AZUSA Street, haven't you? And he was a doctor that was like a block or two away from AZUSA Street, and he kept losing patients. Like, all his patients kept getting healed. And so he didn't know. He was like, I don't know what's going on. And he actually ended up going there himself. And he actually became really an incredible man of God that really started ministering, healing, and doing incredible things with people. And then I know there was also a guy that had his fingers cut off in an accident, and
Man.
they said, well, how about we just ask God to grow them back? And he said, do what? And they said, ask God to grow your fingers back. So as he's holding, they said, hold your hand up in the air, and they started to pray for him. One of the ladies, as his fingers started to grow, it was so overwhelming, she just passed out cold on the floor. So the guy kept holding his arm up in the air, saying, no, no, keep going, keep going. And he watched all of the fingers come back with the fingernails and then completely grow in. So it was a pretty incredible time. And the mist, on the ground, I was talking earlier about the little boys, they loved the mist. The mist was like, but that presence of God was so thick that the people there, that you could feel the presence of God, and the miracles would just start. And many times it said, like Williamseymour wouldn't preach that night. Well, yeah, after somebody's limb grew back, they were so excited, running around dancing, that he couldn't get them to be quiet. They'd run around praising God. Everybody be praising God. It was like a big party till 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or however long. And so he couldn't preach. But would you have a preaching after you had like incredible miracle? I don't know. Maybe not. You don't need it. That's enough, right? So I know there's also one about the arm I thought FC might want to share. And I have a couple more that I have looked at from the book that I kind of made copies of that I thought were pretty cool. But
So the fog, this mist or fog or glory cloud or
right.
whatever, it would sometimes it would just come in so thick they could do this hide and seek, these kids,
Yeah,
and they'd play hide and seek.
I'm taking it. They said that they just, now I've heard, we know that a cloud filled the temple to where the priests couldn't stand, when they dedicated the temple in the Old Testament. And we do know of instances, I've seen places where the clouds were so thick, even in Uganda, where the cloud was thick and you couldn't hardly see the people because of the cloud. And it looked just like a cloud, that had come down over the people, and incredible stuff, miracles happened during those times. But even if you don't see the cloud, it's still there.
Yes.
Like, I think sometimes God allows us to see it, but it doesn't have to be seen. And I remember listening to Kenneth Hagin teach one time, and he said he'd be preaching, standing up or teaching, in a big, huge like auditorium or whatever, and he would see like this mist or this cloud start in the back, and he was like, uh-oh. Like, he knew once it started, he would like, I'm gonna stay away, because he said if he got into it, it just got so much that, you just couldn't really continue on. It would be, that would kind of bring such a presence of God that all this stuff would start happening. But he knew, he could sometimes see it, but he said many people never saw it. So I think it's more often than we think. And I know in Africa, the last time I was there, one of the last days we were there, we had led everybody into speaking in tongues. We had handed out Bibles, and there was a presence there that was so heavy, and there was such a rejoicing and people dancing, and there was a lot of things that happened that were just so incredible just from God. And those kind of things you don't talk about as much because it's not as accepted in many like religion circles, but it's our relationship with God, and God loves to bless his children. He wants to manifest himself. There's nothing wrong with God manifesting his presence, and he can do it in any way he wants. And in AZUSA Street, they so rejoiced in it that it seemed like it was a continual thing. And probably because of the rejoicing, there was an expectation among them also that it would happen. And I think that expectation brings in the presence many times.
What about, let's see, I'm thinking of three of them right now, either the ear or that lady with the tumor, or the lady that did the teeth and teeth would grow in.
Yeah, talk about the ear one. I'm telling you, a lady came in one night with a towel wrapped around her head right here, and just blood coming down. And they were like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? And she said, I caught my husband in bed with another woman. The woman attacked me and bit my ear off, like bit her ear off, which is, oh. And so they just started praying, took the towel off, and completely, her ear was completely grew back and was restored. So that's another woman, I guess, had a tumor that was so big she had to hold it, and came in holding this tumor because it was so big and heavy. And as they ministered to it, it was like 30 seconds, it just disappeared, like gone, totally gone. But I thought you might want to share about the arm, the guy that got his
Well,
arm.
I'm thinking of that one, and I'm thinking about the person that had arthritis and had played in a church, and
Oh, yeah.
he's so arthritis. So I'm thinking of those two. So there was a guy. So the guy with the leg worked for the railroad that lost his legs. So
Right.
I don't remember where the guy it said he worked, but he lost not only his arm, but part of his shoulder was like cut off. And I just can't imagine.
He said it was really painful too.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, the pain, the suffering. And he comes there, and I don't remember who started praying for him, if it was one of the young people or, William or, but anyways, it was a lot of the stuff that was happening was because the young people were ministering, but the person started ministering to him, and the bones just started growing, coming out, and in the skin, the flesh all was appearing on him as it came out till it was fully grown out in a short amount of time. There was a gentleman that had been a music minister in a church somewhere and heard about what's going on, because it was heard so abroad, because within a mile or so of AZUSA Street, people would be falling down and being convicted of, to turn to God.
Right.
And so people would actually get them and take them to the church, and there would be easily 1,000 people. So they had three services a day, but I mean, they couldn't get that many in there. I mean, people were outside around because it was all day services really that just went from one to the next without really an ending, it seems like. But this person was crippled in her hands from severe arthritis and could not play anymore. And the person told him, go over to that piano and play it. I can't play it. No, go over that piano and play it. So finally he does, and he plays it, and he actually went back to his church, got rehired, and there was a person that came in that was not deaf, mute, because there was plenty of deaf stories, plenty of those, who was mute and couldn't speak, and the person tells him to speak. Now we should know that they didn't go, God might heal you. God could heal you. If it's in his favor, they didn't do any of this. They said, God is going to heal you. That was what they told people. So this person comes in and he tells them, just speak. And the guy goes, I can't speak. And he goes, what? I can't speak. And then the guy realizes, oh, I can speak. And so the accounts, it isn't in the hundreds, it's in the thousands, it's even maybe in the tens of thousands, and being in that port. And it was the first, what do you call that? Intercultural or whatever, because all churches were segregated. This is the first church that were all, you had Filipino, you had Chinese, you had,
everybody.
Yeah, all people from all over.
They were all races, all colors, all everything. Nobody cared. Yeah, there was a guy that did he specialized in cleft palates, like the cleft palates, and he would pray for people, and they said like probably 1,000 people he healed of cleft palates that had no teeth, like in gaps and stuff, and they would just come in and be completely whole, like fill in and completely. And then blindness was healed, so much, lots of blindness. They had, and I copied the link on the preview and put the link to this free book. But this lady named Mother Riggs. So this Mother Riggs, she was kind of cool. She said that if anybody in a wheelchair needed to be ministered to, she would also put the footrests up, because that's what Sister Carney always did. So there was all these people, a dozen elderly people that came in wheelchairs. And, but she said they reminded her of her parents. So she was kind of like, oh my gosh. And they all had some kind of major deformities or diseases, were feeble, something was wrong with them. And so she went down the line, put all the footrests up. Immediately after the prayer, all these old people got up, hooked their arms together, and began to dance. All 12 of them. So this whole line of wheelchairs would just, you know, and the stories are like, there's like story after story after story. And there was another one. This one is kind of good. It talks about this miracle this guy did. It says there was this big gawky guy in his early 20s who stood over 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighed over 250 pounds. He came into the meeting with alcohol on his breath, slurring his words and reeking of stale alcohol. So he kind of heard this guy named Riggs. Brother Riggs is his name. He said he heard a voice inside of him saying, "Pray for him." So he went over to the man, realized that not only had he been drinking, but he was also blind. Somewhat stunned, he looked at him and said, "You can't see, can you?" He said, "No, that's what I came for." And he said, "Okay." So he compassionately he prayed for him, put his hands over his eyes, and not only were his eyes healed instantly, but even the stench of alcohol was gone. The
Yeah.
man sat there for a while crying and sobbing and finally said, "Well, it's true. I am healed." So this was a homeless, blind alcoholic, completely restored through the miraculous power of God, who later in life was used of God to preach revivals and establish many Pentecostal churches, and later on the Assembly of God churches across the United States. That guy, the guy that reeked of alcohol and was blind, that came drunk and said, "Yeah, I came here because I'm blind." So that's crazy. That's some
Many,
pretty.
many powerful moves came out of this that even affect us today. I had read where someone was critical of what was happening there, and I was like, they have no idea, because people always, whenever God moves, someone's always going to be the critic of the move, right?
Right.
And that the level, the miracles, the cloud, this fire that would come down from heaven, as you brought up, and then would go up from the building. I mean, what kind of draw that would be for people. And yet, like, the fire department was, that's just the Shekinah glory of the Lord. Don't be calling us about that. Bye. And hang up on them.
How cool would that be?
Yeah, yeah. But it was like God initiated something and he gave such evidence, such like Pentecost, they had cloven tongues of fire. There was such an evidence of what God was doing. And at this time, there was such an evidence. And we don't need that because we have the evidence within.
Right.
And we don't need the external because the inside is even greater than the outside. But God is not limited. God, we think of Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. Well, what about God? Has he changed? No, I'm the Lord, I change not. So he is more willing to move than we are. And I think if Williamseymour, what if he had never got on that trolley and gone to Pasadena, or originally gone to California to preach at that church and they closed the doors? What if he hadn't have done that? Would there ever have been something like this? And it's our obedience, our simple childlike obedience, that God can do something really incredible with. That I tell you, we need to have that same kind of childlike faith, obedience, stepping out in what God says. Tell us a few of the miracles that you have seen, because I know on the trips we've done and you've done, you've seen so many things, and maybe you have a few that you'd like to share.
There's a few that really stand out to me because it was maybe something extraordinary or whatever. There was one woman when we went to Kenya together, FC, that came up to me and said, "I had a dream about you last night. You were in it in this dress. And that to me was like, wow. Like God would put me in somebody's dream that I was going to pray for them and they were going to be healed. To me, that was like, that was astounding, you know, because I mean, who I'm nobody. So I was like, wow. And so it was so powerful when I ministered to her, because she had already, like, she was ready and totally believed that God. And she had some kind of debilitating disease that she couldn't get over, and she had kept losing children. So I don't know if it's cancer of the uterus or whatever, but anyway, that was pretty phenomenal. And then there was a guy that came up to me one day and asked me to pray for his arthritis in his hands. He had terrible, painful arthritis. And so I ministered to him for that, and the pain left instantly. And then all of a sudden he started screaming and jumping up and down about my heart, my heart. And I was like, what? And he said, well, they sent me home from the hospital to die because I have a heart, like a serious heart problem, but it's healed. I have no more. And I was like, I didn't even pray for it. I didn't know I was like, what are you talking? He said, I was supposed to die in like 2 weeks. And he said, but I can tell I'm healed. Like I have no more pain in my, and I was like, he only asked me for his hands, but God just, and I thought, how crazy that is.
Yeah.
And I know the very first time I went to Africa in 2013, I think was the what I would consider the biggest miracle was a woman who came up to me pregnant, very, very pregnant, and said, and of course I had a translator, and she said, I'm 12 months pregnant. The baby inside me is dead. The doctor told me that it will abort by itself. I want God to like heal it. And so I just looked at her. And in Africa, you'd think, well, that wouldn't happen, here because, they've done something. But there, if you don't have the money to pay them, they don't treat you. Like you pay first, then you get the treatment at the doctor. So I, and when we talk about manifestations, I truly believe that God sometimes has to energize something in you when it comes to faith, because I can honestly say, boy, I kind of took a step back, like, okay, like deep breath kind of, and then God just empowered me, and I put my hand on her shoulder and I started speaking life to that baby and commanding that baby to come to life, for God to breathe life into that baby, for it to be whole, for it to be born normally, for whatever that came into my head. And afterwards I looked at her and I said, okay. And then I put my hand, and so did the interpreter, we both put our hands on the top of her stomach, which was huge, and the baby started to kick. And that was probably, I was like, oh my gosh, because I needed to be able to operate a manifestation of faith to believe God could actually do that. I think sometimes in our situations, if they look overwhelming in the senses, then that's when we need God to energize something from God, that we have the faith to carry it through. So
Beautiful.
that's
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. I mean, and I know we can sit here for probably an hour just going through accounts. There's so many more AZUSA Street incidents,
Yes.
but it's like, it's may this word be an inspiration to whoever you are, that there's a scripture that says, don't despise small beginnings. And for them, it was small. Anything that anybody's going to do great with God is going to start small. But God can take your life, your heart, what he's working in you to do something great. And we realize that it wasn't just about an obedient man, Williamseymour. It was about many who carried that and released it. And God is ready to do the same in your life. And so why not rise up, walk out, pray through whatever it is till we see what God has for us. So anything else? Any other?
Well, I think I don't know if there's somebody on here right now or somebody who will be on here, but I just feel like somebody has like maybe a toothache, like, or something, something in their mouth that's hurting, and I just would like to speak into that and say just right now, all that pain to get out, for whatever's there to be gone right now, and it to be totally restored and totally healed in the name of Jesus Christ. I just command that right now.
Yeah.
So
Amen.
feel that. I don't know if you have anything.
There's so much that, it's like, I don't know if I've ever touched on it, but if you have a hernia, if you have, I don't care where it is in your body, if you have a hernia, we declare wholeness right now in that hernia, that all the muscles come together, strengthen, pull it in, and you are totally restored to normal. And there's so many things. I just feel like God is in a sense touching so many body parts, whether it's eyes or ears or throats, whatever it is, wherever you need healing. I just feel like there's an overflow of what God has, because there's never an inflow. It's always the outflow of an overflow, because he says rivers of living water. So this is more than trickles from heaven. So we're speaking life and agreement with what God has declared over you. And whatever you need right now, just raise up your hands. God, I thank you for what you're doing in my body right now. And so be it. Let it be done. Healing wherever it's needed in your body, and he would give great rest to your soul, and that you would have increased vision and purpose of the calling on your life. So, yeah.
And I
All
know,
right.
I do know that one of the biggest keys with the AZUSA Street was they had great expectation. Like they always were, if you couldn't see, well, see. If you couldn't hear, well, hear. You can't
Yeah.
use your hands, well, go play that piano right now. You're in a wheelchair, well, let's lift these foot things up. Now get up and walk. So it's all about doing something. So do something you couldn't do. Move a body part that used to hurt. Tell it that's it. You're done. You're gone. My pains. I am free. I'm free from all this because God has delivered me. And really, he's done it over 2,000 years ago through his son, Jesus Christ, and what he went through for us. So our healing is already assured. And so we just need to claim it and grab it. We have to receive it. I receive that, God. I receive my healing. I'm going to walk in it now. I'm going to walk with this completely restored body that this spirit inside me energizes and makes it whole. It says that it quickens us. It quickens our flesh. It makes it more alive.
Yes.
So I expect that for each person, and every person that needs something, I expect God to provide because he already said he would.
Yes. And I just, for something that just keeps coming to my mind, the lady who had a handkerchief, and she loved to do people that, each had like their little specialty at times, but people that were missing teeth or didn't have teeth or something. And what would she do? She would stick the napkin, the handkerchief or whatever in her mouth with her finger in there, make sure it was cleared out. And she would push down in her mouth. Yes, I don't, push down.
Started growing up.
And she'd command it to grow or whatever, and the teeth would grow in. She'd go, she could have done them all at once, I guess, but sometimes she'd just go one by one and call them to grow, and they would grow
do
forward.
One at a time. I'm not sure why she did just not the whole mouth, but she'd do them like one at a time on purpose. I don't know.
So if you need new teeth, God, we declare new teeth now in the power of that name of your son, Jesus Christ. And anyway, we are here. We love you. Thanks for your time you spend with us. Patty's put the link to some more reading in the previous one, but maybe put that link in this one too. And appreciate you, Ms. Wilkinson, coming on here and sharing God's great working in your life. We look forward for the finished books that Robert's working on, and he's planning a trip coming up soon. Maybe you want to take a minute and share about that.
Yes, Robert, we have quite the itinerary for Robert coming up. Flying out on April 30th, getting into Kenya on May 1st, and then doing Kenya, starting at the coast of Mombasa and Lamu and Malindi, and then traveling across Kenya back to Eldoret, back into Bungoma, and then over into Uganda, and then possibly Rwanda at the end, and then flying home on June 18th from Nairobi. So,
what a mission to minister the gospel.
6 weeks traveling and teaching, and he's got some guys that have been faithfully out teaching, and there's a lot of people hungry to walk in the power of God. And they see some great things. They take people out on the streets. He's done that, and they pray for people. They see miracles. It's amazing. So
Thank you for taking the time to share with us, and thank you, audience, for being part of this, whether on the main broadcast or the replay. We are thankful for your lives.
amen.
All right.
God bless you.
God bless you.
Love you.